Without further ado, let's hear that second half of your presentation, Chaz. I know we're really looking forward to hearing about markets, or I am.
Do you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, and I don't want to get rid of the side slides.
Press the little,
I've got it.
okay.
Okay, I'm sort of like a dirty penny. I'm back again. But this time we'll talk about money, which is usually everybody's favorite topic and what people are most interested in learning about when we talk about markets. So I'm going to talk about I've got the jumpiest mouse in America. Will be the pandemic, or what I call the fog of the pandemic. I'm going to talk about what hasn't changed. I'm going to talk about how recycling markets are reacting. I'm going to talk about current prices, and then I'm going to make some guesses, predictions, as what could happen as the year goes forward. And let's start with what I call the fog of the pandemic. And this is, nobody knows when the pandemic's going to be over. We just don't know how it's going to play out. We have so little history of pandemics and recycling. I mean, 100 years ago, since the Spanish flu, we're dealing with so much uncertainty. When will the pandemic be over? When will the economy recover? Who will win the election? When will we have a cure for the virus? When will we return to normalcy? We're just in uncharted waters, if you will. So but let's first look at what has not changed. Recyclables are still commodities and they are still subject to fluctuating prices. No one in the world has figured out how to prevent commodity prices from fluctuating. Can't be done. Recyclables are still bought. They're not sold. And buyers have the same needs. They have exactly the same needs that I was talking about 3 years ago in Stillwater. Buyers want reliable quantity, they want reliable quality, and they want it at an acceptable price. You know, quality matters. Buyers want your raw materials. They don't want your garbage. And what we have here is simply the picture of a modern mine. It's what we put out at the curbside. And these are just raw materials that are looking for a buyer. Now, paper remains the most important material in that bin. And the pandemic has really reinforced that. And, you know, it's clear that's what's missing from this bin, corrugated paper. So I got 2 questions for you. Can I have the questions come up, please? Since the pandemic began, how much more corrugated do you see in your recycling bin? A little, a lot, no difference? We heard some kind of different answers from the speakers in the previous session. But also, if you're getting more boxes, is that making it harder to collect your recycling? Are they overflowing the bins? Now, what the pandemic really emphasized is the importance of paper to recycling programs. Paper supplies the tonnage, and when times are good, paper supplies the revenue. You know, right now, when it comes to all of American recycling, businesses supply about 2/3 of the paper that's collected for recycling. That's mostly old corrugated boxes from retailers, grocery stores, big box stores, you name it. And there's also, when they were open, businesses were big suppliers of office paper. For residential recycling programs, paper is about 50 to 60% of what is collected. And as been noted in a number of webinars recently, paper is about 70% of the revenue the curbside programs get these days. That's a big chunk. And it's something you've just got to keep in mind, because when those markets are good, they are great. Nonetheless, our overall use of paper is down over the last 20 years, very dramatically. This is paper production in the United States just in the last decade. You see how printed paper went from 44% of the paper that we make and use in this country, it's just a little bit over a third. Container board went from under 40% to almost half. We simply are doing a lot less printed paper and a much higher amount of packaging paper. And the use of the production of tissue and towel paper pretty much grew with the population. No changes there, but a lot of surprises with the pandemic because a lot of both went to industrial use, and that was brown paper. And it's very hard to switch over the production from one to the other. Those mills are really not made that way. They were not designed with the pandemic in mind. Do we have the answers to the first question? More recycling, a lot. And I'm actually glad to see that it's not making it harder to collect. That's a good sign. That's good to see. So let's look at changes in North American market capacity in terms of recycled content paper. This is the new Pratt recycling mill in Wapakoneta, Ohio, which formerly was best known as the hometown of Neil Armstrong. Now it's best known as America's newest 100% recycled content mill. It's actually about to celebrate its first anniversary in operation. It uses 180,000 tons per year of residential mixed paper and old corrugated containers in a 2-to-1 ratio. And that's going to double over a decade as the mill catches up. They get more and more supply, more and more orders. But what this picture tells you is entrepreneurs, when the Chinese ban was announced, saw tremendous opportunity. They saw a lot of inexpensive raw material that would quickly be coming available, and they started building those plants. There's since then been announcements of 26 expansions or new facilities announced since the National Sword was announced. This data comes from a study that's published by the Northeast Recycling Council. I'm the chairman of their markets task force. So I've been tracking this for NERC. 26 expansions and new facilities since February of 2017. Old corrugated containers are the primary product at for those facilities, raw material, but half of them will use residential mixed paper to one extent or another. And 4 of them are designed to ship recycled fiber pulp to China. That's what they are built to do. Now, what's the status of these mills? 8 of the OCC expansions are already completed or will be completed by the end of the year. On the residential mix side, 1 new facility, Pratt, has already opened. The new mill in Green Bay, Wisconsin will open either at the end of this year or early next year, but they're already buying paper. Because if you're a new mill, you start your paper buying 5 to 6 months in advance. You got to run paper to test the facility, and you just got to start building up inventory so you're ready when it's time to to start formal operation. Now, there was a new mill that was supposed to be in Virginia, Cascades, near Richmond. It was supposed to open a couple of months from now. It's actually been delayed until late 2022. And that gets back to that sort of double-edged sword between the price of raw materials versus what an industry wants to pay versus what you want to get. I think what happened was the company got a little bit spooked by some of the price, when the price of raw material shot through the roof in May. And they sort of had some second thoughts, but they worked those out. That's about 4 to 5 million tons of announced new capacity. Not all of that is going to be built, but I think it's fairly clear most of it will be built. Let's look at this on the recycled content side for plastic, because we've also been tracking this at NERC. 25 new processing facilities have been announced. At least 9 of those are already open. Most will make resin. They'll simply make recycled plastic pellets for end markets to buy. Some of them are making end products such as plastic lumber. Again, there's just no guarantee that all of these new plastic facilities will be built. But quite frankly, given the number of companies that have said they want more recycled content for plastic, I think they've got a lot of tremendous opportunities there. So let's get down to what people really want to talk about, price. Now, everybody uses pricing sheets. They're still basically good, but there's not as many buyers as there used to be due to consolidation. So what I hear more and more is the pricing sheets are really great for trends. They may not be that great for your specific markets or your specific needs. And you also have to ask yourself, how fresh is the data? What was the time between when the data was collected and when it's published? But basically, they're very good for trends. We got some more questions we want to ask now. So could I have those pop up, please? I want you to just mark off, what is your easiest product to sell? And what is your hardest product to sell? And we'll come back to this question in just a minute or two. And let's look at some prices. Now, all the prices I'll be showing you come from Resource Recycling. They were published on September 15th. They were collected by a group called recyclingmarkets.net. When I'm showing, and I'll be doing this for the other prices that I show, you'll see the current price, then you'll see the price a year ago, and then you're going to see the price just at the beginning of the year. Old corrugated containers. I mean, these are great prices. They're steady. They become steady. After some tremendous spike in May, they started at $25 in January. A year ago, OCC was only selling for $27 a ton in this country. That's the national average. Now it's up at 60. And it's been kind of steady at 60 for the last 2 or 3 months, a little above, a little below. It did shoot up very dramatically in May when all of a sudden you had all the businesses closed, supply got cut off, demand was still there, so prices did what prices always do in that kind of situation. They shot up. Mixed paper has gone up. It was 2 below zero at the beginning of the year, 2 below zero a year ago. It's $18 a ton now. And again, there is that downside. There's that tension between what you want as a seller, as much money as possible. Every seller on this conference call loved when it was $107 a ton. And when I think the absolute peak for OCC was 170. Every buyer of OCC groaned copious tears at 170, and they weren't thrilled at 107. So you just have to remember those variables as we go through these. Later. Metals. Aluminum cans are on 1 cent per pound. A year ago, they were 54 cents per pound. Right now, it's 45 cents, close to 46. It's both down from a year ago and down from the beginning of the year. Steel cans are down on a per ton basis. What you have for both metals is global overcapacity to produce, whether it's aluminum or steel. And you also have in the aluminum industry, they started switching a year or two ago to being much more interested in automotive markets and less interested in packaging markets. What happened in between, beer started to switch more and more to aluminum cans. Now the industry is looking at building 3 new facilities to handle all the new capacity for aluminum, for cans, but it's going to take a while to get that capacity online. And let's look at plastics. Never a happy subject, and no change on this one, with one exception. The one exception is natural HDPE, 26 cents a pound a year ago, 55 cents a pound now. And it's actually down a little bit from the beginning of the year, but those prices at the beginning of the year were just really abnormally high. Everything else is down, but with one exception, they're starting to move up again. PET, 6.5 pennies a pound, down from close to 11 a year ago. It's just not going anywhere. The other 3, colored HDPE, polypropylene, and film, they're also down a little bit from a year ago, but they've actually gone up a little bit in the last month. Those grades are starting to to firm. And what's one of the problems? It's energy prices. It's the raw material plastics are made from. US fossil fuel consumption was down 10.5% as of May. That is the latest year-over-year figures. Brent crude in 2019 was 64 a barrel. Right now, it's 42 a barrel. And the prediction for next year is 48 a barrel. It's just a tough market for recycled plastics to compete with because those raw material prices, the basic raw material is so low. On the other hand, how many of us want to pay more for gas when we fill up our car? I mean, again, this one kind of cuts both ways. So, I got one question I want to ask here. Do we have an answer to that question I just asked a minute ago? Thank you. Easiest product to sell, aluminum and steel. That's probably the aluminum side, but that's good to see. On the hardest products, mixed paper. I'm not surprised at that at all, and nor am I surprised at PET bottles being the hardest. Thanks. And now we're going to move on to look at some prices. What do you think the economy will be like in 6 months? Do you think it's going to be worse? Do you think it's going to be better? Do you think it's going to be the same? And when do you think the pandemic will be finished? And you don't have to answer this immediately. Just give us some thought to this as we go through the next slides, because this is my answer. It's my answer to prices. I don't know. And you talk to anybody in the business who speaks at conferences about markets, and we all say the same thing. There is so much uncertainty out there, it's very hard to make good predictions. Let's start with just data about the US economy. Consumer spending, they're down 34% year over year at the end of the second quarter. We're now in the beginning of the last quarter. The data for the third quarter will come out in about 2 to 3 weeks. It's not going to be much better. Business spending down 46% year over year. State and local spending down 5.5% year over year. The gross domestic product was down 32% year over year. Yes, there was a slight increase in August, but this is not encouraging news. Unemployment, 4 times higher than pre-pandemic. The latest figures, the end of September, is down to almost to a little bit under 8%. But we've only replaced half the jobs that were lost since mid-March. And the reality, you've already heard announcements of layoffs in the airline and the travel industries. Household income is down. Record-setting retail store closures and retail chain bankruptcies. You know, the debate at one point was, will this be a swoosh or a V-shaped recovery? A V-shaped being the kind where you go down and you go right back up. A swoosh is more like the Nike symbol. And it's probably going to be more like the one after the 2008 recession, which was a swoosh recovery. We hit bottom at the beginning of 2009, but we were not back to the same GDP level until mid-2011. So there's also some encouraging signs. Confidence. Purchasing managers, the guys who are predicting how much they have to sell, have to make so they can sell to their customers, which means how much raw materials do they need to buy. They're up at 53. Now 53 is not great, but it's on the positive side. They have more confidence now in where the economy is going. Business economy actually happens to be the highest it's been since April of 2019. Consumer confidence surged to 101.8. That is the biggest monthly increase in consumer confidence in 17 years. And there's a lot of new small businesses either being announced or opening. So you get that kind of very positive thoughts about where the economy is going. But at the same time, retailers are now stocking up their warehouses in case the pandemic gets worse, so they don't get caught short the way they were in March and April. It's just all this unpredictability. It makes it very, very challenging to predict where we think prices are going. So this is my little, oops. I've lost track of my own slides here. Oh, I know what the problem is. It's all on me. It always is on me. It's about uncertainty. I apologize. A vaccine, when are we going to get it? Jobs, when are they going to really come back? Economy, when is it really going to come back? Warren Buffett really summed it up in early May. He doesn't know anybody who knows what the market is going to do tomorrow, next month, next week, next year. Just so much uncertainty. But you all have asked me to make predictions, so you are going to get some predictions. Recycling markets for paper 2020. I think they're likely to stay kind of steady, but there's, again, will the economy be weaker or stronger? If all these businesses reopen, will they increase the supply of OCC and lower prices, or will they need more boxes and will prices stay steady? Will offices reopen? Will printed paper return? Those variables really, they sort of keep anybody who forecasts prices from being too confident, too bold in their predictions. Plastic markets, challenging conditions again. A lot of virgin plastic resin capacity out there. On the other hand, a whole bunch of 2 or 3 planned new virgin resin plants, plastic plants were canceled in the petrochemical industry. Yet the recycled plastic capacity plants are still being built. So I think that part of it is good, but oil is cheap. And again, are brands going to honor those commitments to purchase recycled content? That is, in so many ways, by far the biggest variable we're looking at on the plastic side. Once again, I skip ahead of where I want to be. That's my fault here. Again, I apologize. I haven't learned well yet how to flip pages when I'm on a Zoom conference, and I've done a bunch of this. It's an art that unfortunately I have not yet mastered. But there's one additional thought I want to leave you with. Will Americans learn to recycle right? And we heard a fascinating discussion on contamination in the previous session. You know, contamination still remains persistent. We tell pollsters we love to recycle. We tell posters we want to buy recycled, but the contamination in our carts really betrays us. And it may well be the pandemic is the time we need to rethink recycling and maybe just cut back on everything, the different stuff we collect, and focus on the majors and let the minors just wait for a while. Maybe that's something we need to do. Maybe we want to focus more on lowering greenhouse gas emissions than just more tonnage of recyclables. But I think one thing that's very telling, a lot of MRFs now are hoping they can get residue down to 10%. And that tells you something right there. That tells you that contamination is remaining stubbornly persistent. And that we Americans are not yet good recyclers. We want to recycle, but we don't want to recycle right. And we have got to overcome that. We have got to create that culture where everybody automatically just doesn't recycle, but recycles right. Now, I do see light at the end of the tunnel. I just can't tell you how long that tunnel's going to be. I can't tell you if we're 3 months away from the end of the tunnel or 2 years. I'm cautiously optimistic about paper markets. At the beginning of the year in January, I was speaking at a conference in Connecticut where I did not use the word pandemic. I was cautiously optimistic about paper markets at that point. And I turned out to be somewhat right. And then the markets exploded to everybody's shock. And then they went back down. I think that for paper, all signs point to long-term improvement. It's just the short term that's going to be turbulent. I think the tunnel is going to be a little longer for plastics, because in plastics you still have variables between, in particular, all these soft drink and bottled water companies that say they want recycled content. How much are they really willing to pay? They can overpay the less willing markets, your strapping and your sheeting and whatnot. They can't outbid the fiber guys, and I don't know how that is going to play out. But in my 4 years in recycling, I have never seen this kind of extreme disruption. But I've also learned a few key things about recyclers. Recyclers are resilient, and optimistic. Political support for recycling means very, very, very strong. History tells us this ride is going to be bumpy, but it also tells us we will survive this latest crisis. That's part of the nature of recycling. I've lost track of how many market collapses I have seen since I started at EPA in 1976. It's at least a dozen, and we'll see more. I just can't tell you when we're going to be at that tunnel. I just know that sooner or later we will be there, and we'll see much better markets. And with that, I thank you. This is my contact information. You should be able to get my slides and speaker PowerPoint notes from Okra. If not, just send me an email. I will get them to you. And I also have in my speaker notes a list of sources, which are all, I think, very good. They're good sources of information. It also includes sources of the recycled paper demand study, which I've got to update that link. So do not send it out, Okra, till I get you one with the right link. And the one for the plastic capacity. The other sources are all people who are highly qualified sources for data about markets. So I'm going to start. Let me see. Questions.
I'm going to read some questions for you. So
yeah, I've got the chat box open. I'm looking at the one when recycling OCC. How important is removal of tape? Is tape a source of contamination? Actually, at any paper mill worth its salt, that tape will not be a problem. 10 years ago, they would have cleared their throat and not been happy about it. 20 years ago, they would have hated it. But for the same reason, they can now deal with pizza boxes. They know they have to deal with that contamination. They've made their changes. They can deal with them. And so they're just moving on. So, you know, I tend to pull it off if it's easy to pull off, but it's not that big a deal. And
we had another one earlier. We can safely say the regional glass market for our area stays strong and steady. Is that correct?
Most of the glass markets don't change a lot. So if you've got a strong market for glass, that is not likely to change in any time soon. Up in the Northeast, they lost their glass mill, and those markets are not happy. They're okay in this area because we've got access to a couple of mills and a number of secondary markets. And that's one of the most regional markets in the country, I think, is glass markets. And is there another question?
Anybody have any others? Otherwise, I'm going to go back up to the top from earlier and see what we missed. I have a personal question, Chaz. You mentioned a high price for the natural HDPE. What is the cause of that?
Oh, when HDPE, and it got up to incredibly high prices in October and November, and was still high in December and January. That was first part of the reason it had to do with new specs for sewer and water pipe that would have allowed recycled content. So all of a sudden, those markets got very interested, demand shot up. There was also suspected that some companies were stockpiling, and it shot up prices. The other reason is KW can sell all the HDPE they can get their hands on to automobile companies. It's a good market. Natural is just a lot of demand for it. And because the demand is there, whether it's pipes, whether it's milk bottles, whether it's automobile parts, it's sending the prices up.
Okay. One of the questions from earlier, what effect might microplastic pollution have on PETE fiber?
I don't have the foggiest idea. And the reason I don't have the foggiest idea is I think it depends. First of all, the pollution is totally separated. That's where you're getting into wastewater issues and ocean debris issues. When it gets into the recycling processes, whether it's a your typical mechanical where everything gets shredded and then sorted and whatnot, or whether it's this new chemical, I don't think that I don't think that'll be a problem at all for that. I think that's just more of an environmental issue we need to resolve. Hey, the more we recycle, the less of a problem we'll have for that, at least for that part. Any other questions?
I'm looking back from earlier. Does anybody have any new ones? Any hands raised? Trying to see. We got the expert on the line, guys. Now's your opportunity. Don't waste it.
Ah, we have a new message. It was a very nice message. Can you talk about tying a price contract to an index? Sure. And that's a good thing to do. You got to be careful picking your index. Make sure they have a good set of sources. Find out how often they update the data. You also ask how often you want to change prices in the contract based on that index. Is it going to be every month? Is it going to be an average? Are you, for instance, going to do the average for a year, the average compared? Are you going to go on that? But I think it's pretty uncommon not to tie a price contract to some kind of a pricing index. It's more transparency for both buyer and seller. Did the recyclable plastics exceed the demand after the China tariffs? Absolutely, particularly for mixed plastics, because it was mixed plastics that got hurt the worst when China said they'd take no more. PET and HDP were already out of that market, and it definitely caused problems on mixed plastic. And, you know, frankly, we'll see how it plays out now as the Basel Convention plays out. And as we renegotiate the transboundary agreement with Canada when it comes to the recycled plastic that currently goes to end users in Canada. We're going to see how that plays out. I think that there's clearly more demand, more desire for recycled content in plastics. The companies just have to follow through on their goals, and they have to start buying and they have to start using it more. Now, granted, you can't just change it's like a cake. You know, you can't change the recipe for a cake while you're making the cake unless you're an extremely good cook. It's sort of the same way with making bottles or glass or paper. You can't immediately change that recipe. You've got to work in the changes, but they got plenty of time. And when it comes to PET bottles, it's not going to be nearly as hard as for some other products.
Let's take this one last question from Bryce, which is mixed glass media sources. What are some thoughts to expand that market?
It's going to be secondary kinds of materials, whether it's maybe some fiberglass uses, but various aggregate, sandblasting, that sort of thing. And the issue becomes how much can you expand those markets and how much will the value actually grow with it? A lot of those are very niche markets, or they're not, aggregate's not a particularly high value market, at least to the best of my knowledge, it's not. And somebody asked the question, how bad is it to mix all plastics together for recycling? You got to separate. There's a lot of information that's out there that you got to separate. It makes a lot of sense to mix plastics at collection because they're relatively easy to separate, and they're getting easier to separate in processing. And what you're really trying to separate out is the PET, the HDPE, natural versus color, and the polypropylene. Because right there, you've got by far the biggest amounts of plastic packaging, and you've also got the best markets. Beyond that, there's not that much that gets collected at the curbside, and the markets are, you know, they just get more peripheral. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very good. I think that was all of the questions, and we're running out of time for the day. So Chaz, thank you so much again.
My pleasure.
And thank you for answering all of our questions as well.